All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you spending the whole week with us. And if you're watching this on demand, really glad you came back. There's a lot during this power hour. So I'm Francisco Barahorta. I am a training director here at IRE NICAR. And I am just so thrilled to be partnering again with the Maynard Institute. This is a collaboration with them. They also presented earlier fault lines and highly recommended looking that up for your newsroom, and our moderator will be talking more about the Maynard Institute in a moment. So we're here to talk about tapping the power of ethnic media and America's coverage of racial equity. Just some house rules. This is a live panel. So how this works is that please put your questions into Pathable, and there is where I will be sending them to the moderator, who will then be considering them to ask them for the panel. And so you can ask them at any point and queue up now. It's a little bit different than doing it in person. And so that's probably the best way to get your question answered. If you have problems with this panel and you need to pop out into Zoom, you can do that, but do not put your questions in the Zoom chat because they will probably not. Everything will be archived on the Pathable page, which will be great. So people watching this will be able to understand questions that the panelists are speaking about. And so that's been really, really helpful. I just want to again introduce Odette with the Maynard Institute, and we partnered with them on some trainings, and it's been great. I started my career at La Prensa, which is a bilingual newspaper, so I got started with ethnic media, and I remember that the mainstream news organizations in hometown where I was working at this bilingual publication didn't really view what we did as legitimate or as high quality. They questioned our allegiance, and this was just in 2001. So, you know, this is still something we're dealing with, but now we're seeing some of these mainstream media organizations and realize our value, how we've been doing this from the beginning. And so we're really excited to show ways these bridges. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Odette to talk a little bit about the Maynard Institute and to introduce our panel. So Odette, please take it away.
Going to unmute myself right there. Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Francisco, for such a warm introduction. And as Francisco cites, I'm Odette Alcazaren-Keeley. I'm the director of the Maynard 200 Journalism Fellowship Program. And Francisco, on behalf of our MIJE co-executive directors, Martin Reynolds and Evelyn Sue. Martin, of course, did our Fault Lines Diversity Framework workshop last Tuesday here on the IRE 20 virtual conference. On behalf of them and our entire team, we have our colleagues here with us today as well. We'd like to thank you for your continued partnership with us. We're talking about partnerships today, and that includes our participation this week, of course, in your landmark conference. And thank you to everyone joining us today for this session. And of course, our distinguished panelists, ethnic media leaders whose expertise and insight embody the core strength of this sector. And that is of diverse perspectives that are deepening the coverage and conversation of the crises of our time, of our racial revolution. And I'll talk more about what's in store for us today. We do have a fourth panelist, Cheryl Smith, just having some technical difficulties, but we're gonna hope and pray that everything pulls through. But I wanted to mention, as Francisco cited, that today's dialogue in partnership with IRE is in fact part of our ongoing series at the Institute of Digital Events and Digital Resources aimed to provide information, diverse perspectives, resources, and support to all of our networks. And on the screen, you're seeing our digital platforms and our links, our brand spanking new website, our e-newsletter, and our social media portals. We are excited to continue to connect with all of you through these platforms of the Maynard Institute. And when you check the Pathable page of this session, in fact, it's in the files section, this particular slide, so that you can go back and connect with us. And we look forward to have more conversations and to have you at our next events. I'll be introducing our speaker shortly, but what I'd like to say is that what's going to be clear from this discussion is that we're going to be talking about the power of ethnic media. And in fact, not just the power, we're going to be talking about ethnic media's superpower, and that is context. In America's racial reckoning, journalists of ethnic media organizations have been telling the stories of these structural divides for decades because they are lived experiences. Because journalists from the ethnic media sector are part of these very communities that they serve, of these very audiences. And so they have been covering these issues of the disproportionate impacts and disproportionate access to healthcare and insurance, to education, to housing, nutrition, high-level paying wages, overall economic mobility and economic opportunity that have been laid bare once again by the wreckage and the ravages of the global pandemic, its economic devastation, and as well as the clamor for racial justice that protesters have been articulating in the streets. And the wounds are raw from this week's grand jury decision on Breonna Taylor's shooting death, and from all that we have seen and heard in the streets of the United States from the clamor for racial justice in the heels of George Floyd's death. Because of ethnic media's direct, inherent gaze into their communities, into their audiences of color, they are making those connections that are often missed by other media. As a 2019 media diversity study reflects nationally, approximately 80% of newsroom leaders and frontline journalists are white. So it is no surprise, and it's important to acknowledge that ethnic media come with greater insight. As we in the Institute look at dismantling systemic racism through our Fault Lines Diversity Framework primarily, as we seek to dismantle that structural racism within our own industry, we see in ethnic media, we see in their embedded nature and in their mission as vanguards of news and information for their own communities, the communities that they are a part of, that they belong to, we see in them the answer to that fight, an answer to that fight. Their authentic storytelling is a foundational power. And today, our speakers are going to also talk to us and share with us their experience of their own collaborations with mainstream media organizations and how those are tapping into that power of storytelling of the ethnic media sector and can also be contributing to the sustainability of both sectors. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, their titles and their media affiliations. Their full bios are a click away at your fingertips in the session page on Pathable. Then I'll be kicking off our discussion with Khanstoshea. So I'm going to mention who we have on the panel today. And that is, we have Mark Trahant, editor of Indian Country Today, a digital media enterprise. And their partnership, the partnership of Indian Country Today with the Associated Press, includes that of their managing editor of ICT simultaneously holding a staff position at the AP. We also have Maria Bastidas. She's the Vice President of Digital Content at MundoHispánico.com. And Mundo Hispánico has ongoing collaborations with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, as well as with the local TV network WSB-TV. And Maria will also talk to us about the collaboration that their editorial team did with the New York Times last year. We're also going to be speaking later on with Cheryl Smith. We're hoping that the technical problems will get smoothed out. And she is the editor and publisher of iMessenger Media LLC. But let's talk first with you, Khanstoshea. And Khanstoshea, what I'd like to find out, because your core expertise at Black Zebra, and I see that your better half, you're a husband and wife team really that put this together, the heart and soul of this with Jeffrey here. The core of this is your video, multimedia, and documentary film services expertise to present social justice issues, to amplify these issues. And as part of your team, you have a pool of video producers all over the United States. And where have you focused? I'd like to hear from you. Where have you focused your camera lens in this reckoning, especially from everything that has happened from Wednesday in Kentucky. Tell us about those demonstrations in solidarity with George Floyd that made your pieces, your multimedia pieces viral. And what are you seeing now on the ground, especially this week? How has the movement for racial equity shifted? So thank you, Khanstoshea. And I think you may have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, so just wanted to say first off, thank you guys for having us. Really appreciate it. And yes, it did start with me and my husband in 2016. And just from the start, we just really wanted to focus on issues that were affecting our community. We are very interwoven into our community, so it was very easy for us to be able to tell those stories because like you said, those are also affecting us as well. So yeah, for the you asked a bunch of questions and they're really long. Okay, yeah, so what we've been seeing on the streets, we've put our focus on a lot of different places. We've been in Portland, Chicago, Washington DC, New York, Kenosha. We've been in Sacramento, all up and down California. We just really been trying to put a lens and a focus anywhere where crisis against humanity, social justice, where people are, the narrative may be getting out of line, and really just trying to focus a lens on that community truth-telling, that community documenting of what was going on. So the focus is really everywhere, but we've been blessed to be able to set up teams, like you're saying, in different locations, and to be able to really amplify the creatives that are there, the community that's there, and then exactly what was going on. But a lot of the things that you're seeing, especially this week, you know, things have been pretty consistent in those main cities that I did list off. But now with the Breonna Taylor case, the deciding of that from the grand jury, that has just like reignited a flame throughout many places, especially Louisville, Kentucky. So that's definitely what we're seeing, and we're just trying to offer a lens into the truth, into the streets, into exactly what's going on in the communities.
And you're truly amplifying voices there that perhaps some voices that may be missed. And one thing that is at the core of our discussion today is you have a partnership ongoing right now with the Sacramento Bee. You're creating a documentary film for them. Is it going to be related at all with this battle for racial equity in some way?
Yeah, definitely. So we were live streaming, documenting what was going on here in Sacramento, in our hometown, and a lot of police brutality was occurring even with the press. And all of a sudden the SACB came out and gave us a press pass and enabled us to be able to stay out there past curfew, enabled us to do our First Amendment rights, basically. And so, yeah, with that, we've been partnering with them in different live streaming situations where we might have content that they're interested in, and there's a collaboration there. But the overall collaboration is to create a documentary, and that documentary will be focused on our work in Sacramento, as well as how and why we decided to travel to those different spots and why they're interconnected and why, you know, it's much more than just an issue going on in Sacramento.
Thank you so much, Khanstoshea. Thank you to you and Jeffrey and the entire team that's really putting a spotlight and putting the lens straight to this movement, and how this movement is going to evolve, I think, is something that's going to be very clear, especially as we enter into the elections. Another context that I think we're going to talk about also in our conversation today. I'm going to pivot now to Cheryl. Wonderful to see you. And I'm going to do a quick introduction here, Cheryl. Cheryl, since 2012, has been the editor and publisher of iMessenger Media, LLC, the multimedia organization that includes Texas Metro News, Garland Journal, and iMessenger, as well as digital and broadcast components. And Cheryl, my question to you is also related in terms of your direct collaboration, your partnership right now in Texas Metro News with the Dallas Morning News, and of course with everything that has happened with the grand jury decision on the Breonna Taylor shooting death. And what have been the focus news angles that you feel may have been missed by other media, by general market media, any other media organizations, about where we see the movement for racial justice, the clamor for racial equity with all of the developments this week, and how is that also strengthening and enriching your partnership with Dallas Morning News? How are your two lens and perspectives informing and enriching each other? So thank you, Cheryl.
Well, thank you so much for that. Let me tell you, first we started with the morning news. Mike Wilson came to me because, and I have to give him credit for understanding, he actually knew how our community felt about the Dallas Morning News. And so he knew relationships were, there had been protests in the 1990s. And then when you look at the newsroom in the 1990s and you look at it today, actually the 1990s look better. And people were just tired of the Dallas Morning News and not reaching out and diversifying their sources and not sharing, not just going to the usual suspects every time to get an opinion, to get a perspective. And this was something that they wanted to change. So we didn't enter into it lightly because I had major concerns, and we're trying to build a strong news organization that's journalistically sound. And we had to look at what were the benefits of it. And for me, it was a situation of, I really felt like people would say, there would be the people would say, every time we get something in our community that's good, we sell out. We let someone else buy it and take ownership of it. And so I actually told Mike and folks on the team there, I said, if someone comes to me and says, oh, you sold out to the morning news, I said, I'm going to say, oh, no, to the contrary, I bought them. And that's just the narrative that I had put forth with them. And I looked at what could we bring to a partnership with the Dallas Morning News. Well, I can go anywhere in my community. I've been here a long time, and the footprint is there, and that's what folks need to know. They need to know that you're going to come to them not just when there is an issue, but you're going to come and look for some of those good stories, not just during Black History Month. And so we talked about what would this partnership entail. Now we're looking at, fast forward to a number of issues. There were a number of things that have happened recently where I felt we brought so much more to the table. I'll use first with Senator Harris being picked as a partner, as the vice presidential candidate. Well, I said we need to go out. We knew her sorority sisters. Actually, for those who know about pledging, we actually know someone really well who pledged with her. And so we were able to go and hunt people that they had to find. We were able to get with them. We have those relationships already in our community. So we said, let's go to folks who can really talk about what this means for them. So we had that situation. We had the issue with the Supreme Court justice. We have a Black woman running for Texas Supreme Court, and we also have Dallas County has the most Black female judges in a county in the United States of America. So we just had a plethora of sources that we could go to, and not the same people all the time. And that's what people accuse the Dallas Morning News of. And so we have those conversations. We meet, part of our partnership is meeting and sitting and talking about stories and talking about what, I tell them I don't speak for all Black people because we're not monolithic, but I stand by what I say. And I will say something, we will have the tough conversations about stories and what is a perspective. We're trying to give them a perspective that they might not have thought about. Mm-hmm. We are, our partnership also includes events. We'll be doing town hall meetings. We're doing a town hall meeting next week on voting. We did one last month on historically Black colleges and universities. And So we had conversations about who was going to be included. And because no one owns me, sometimes a partnership, you walk a fine line. I'm not walking any lines. I don't have a filter, because what I do say is, if they respected me enough to bring me to the table, I'm going to respect them enough to give them all of me. I'm going to be candid. I'm going to say, this does not look good. We were putting a panel together, actually, and like, I don't want to be the NAACP of every room I walk into. I feel that everyone sitting around the table has an obligation to think diversity, to think inclusion. So in that meeting with them, I did say, you know, I'm old and I don't want to hear all these people, because all the people were over 50. And then I said, you know, and it would be really good if, you know, we can't find a Native American or an Asian. I ask those questions as a Black woman. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm bringing to the table, inclusion for all of us. And with what's going on with the recent, with Breonna Taylor, mm-hmm. It's something every day. There's something every day that we have to deal with. But what I submit to you as we deal with this pandemic that we're going through, I could say that for Black people living in America, we've been in a state of pandemonium for a long time. So this is just one more pandemic. And sometimes folks have said, well, why aren't they being more cautious? Why aren't they doing this? You know, because don't they know they may not live tomorrow? Well, a lot of Black people, that's their reality anyway, mm-hmm. in the communities. So we have to do a job. We're trying to educate. So I'm looking at this partnership as an opportunity for us not only to educate the media, but to educate communities to, I know that everyone is not happy with it. While I have people saying it's a good thing, there are people, Black and white, who are saying, no, it isn't a good thing. And so we're going to show them. We're going to take a deep dive into those stories. And it's not a big them and a little me. Yes. We're on equal footing.
Absolutely. You know, Cheryl, there's so much to unpack there, and everything that you have recounted and shared with us, what Khanstoshea has shared with us, resonates with me. And in my own background, having worked 12 and a half years in the Ethnic Media Consortium that was then named New America Media, now it's called Ethnic Media Services, and also prior to that being part of Ethnic Media directly as a news executive producer and co-anchor of the Filipino channel ABS-CBN International. And everything that you're saying about that mutual respect of what we bring to the table, an acknowledgement of the expertise that each partner brings, I think more and more where we can really do away with the labeling of ethnic media, and it's all media. And that is something that I was always adamant and firm in my belief in our reporters having that equal level playing access, that you are a journalist and you have every right to be in every corner where news is happening. And we're going to unpack so much of what you said about that mutual respect, about what aspects of partnership need to be at the pillar of all this to really benefit both organizations. And we're also going to talk about where racial justice is headed. So as we look at that, I'm going to pivot to Mark. You know, Mark, we've been talking about this reckoning. And when we speak of systemic inequities, we hear very loudly through decades, through centuries, the cries of the first people. This is something that you, as editor of Indian Country Today, as a member of this community, has been at the forefront of. And it has hit these proportionate impacts. These inequities have hit Native American communities across almost all socio-economic concerns and health and political concerns. And it could not even be truer more than this past summer as the peak of the coronavirus outbreak hit from the biggest reservations to the smallest pueblos. So I wanted to ask you, you have this, amongst many partnerships, you have this direct, I consider it as almost as direct a model of relationship or a model of partnership that you can see between ethnic and mainstream media. Your managing editor in Indian Country Today is in fact a staff member of the Associated Press. When the racial justice movement was happening, what stories were resonating with your own audience, your own community? What kind of stories were you talking about with your managing editor, and how did that enrich the partnership? And Mark, you need to unmute yourself.
Supposed to be automatic.
Yes.
That is really an interesting one. I think one thing that both our readers and our journalists expect is to take every story with a long arc of history and to think through about what it means to be in a place for 10,000 plus years. And when you look at it that way, the United States is this old. It's a really small part of that history. And so when you look at it much broader, you start to see how things connect over time in a very different way. For example, one of the things we've spent a lot of time with on the pandemic is going back through and writing a lot about 1919 and the influenza pandemic. And what's interesting about that period of time is how parallel it was with the streets and what was going on in the streets and the actions of police. And you can almost take any story from today and put it in the headlines of 1921 through 1919, and it would be awful familiar. Our partnership on that is, we have several partnerships, but AP was really important. It was really early. And we convinced them to land a Lakota woman, Katie Oyen, who came to us from, she was a regional editor for AP and is here for a year as our managing editor. I think one of the most important parts of a partnership with AP is not the big stories, certainly not the daily ones that we're engaged with every day, but it's the kind that would be completely missed. For example, we had this morning a story about an elder who died, and we wrote a really lengthy obituary about her and her role over time. That story will get picked up by AP, and it'll have readers around the world of a story, a person that would never even be noted had we not been around. We also have a significant partnership with Arizona State University and Alaska Pacific University. We basically were a nonprofit newsroom, and we try to base all of our activities at universities because we like free rent, and try to build on that as an environment to foster the kind of journalism we're trying to do. One other thing I will mention is, for us, one of the big stories I think coming up is the idea of governance. And it's not enough to be representative anymore. It has to actually include governance. And probably the most direct example of that is in the Arctic. And in the Arctic, indigenous voices are now permanent seats in international bodies, and having indigenous knowledge take on as the same weight as science and other factors in how the Arctic is going to be governed. And we think that's a model that we're looking forward to. One of the things we try to do is to cover all indigenous communities, not just Native Americans, but different indigenous communities around the world, and how they want to have their place protected.
That's really critical that you mention climate change, mention our natural environment. Very much close to home for us here, of course, in the West, from California to Oregon to Seattle, what we have just and can still continue to recover from in terms of the wildfires. And Mark, we're gonna kind of flesh through more and more as we go through this discussion. So much of also your coverage, I had the great pleasure to interview you for our Medium blog as we looked at Native American coverage of the global pandemic. And in fact, Indian Country Today was at the forefront of creating its own database that, in fact, Johns Hopkins University contacted you because this was really, it really filled the gaps of where the infection was affecting Indian Country.
Right. And I want to go back to the climate change one because that gets to the idea of history.
Sure.
Is there was a major climate disruption 1,000 years ago, and it caused people to move throughout the region. And this is in our DNA, but it's in our history too, about how that happened. I mean, my own tribal community, Shoshone-Bannock, went from hunting mastodon to bison and other animals. And so this idea of change is really important to us. The database is really interesting. We couldn't get the information we were wanting, so we created our own. One of the things that hospitals are really lousy at is classifying racial groups at the time of death. And they just don't bother to find out anything. And so the information comes in without any kind of description. And we really wanted to get a good sense of how many people were dying. And to this day, our database on, unfortunately, people who've lost their lives during the pandemic is the only one out there.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for reinforcing how important, you know, both threads are, including climate change. It's something that hits close to home for so many. There was a data point several years back. We were part of the same ethnic media network where what was predicted is that the next global crisis is actually going to be about climate refugees and what that means for the resources that are at hand within our own countries and with the entire global community. So very much appreciate, I think what you have spotlighted here is where the lens of ethnic media, in fact, is not only about its own community, about its own city or region. In fact, its lens is global. Maria, I'm going to pivot now to you. Maria is the VP of Digital Content at Mundo Hispánico. And Maria, when we talk about the vitriol of the otherization in America, the xenophobia, the assault on civil rights, we don't have to look far. We don't even have to look that long way back, but especially in this administration. MundoHispánico.com, your stories out of Atlanta and all of Spanish language media shone a spotlight on the separation of families at the border, of the assault on undocumented immigrants. And when we talk about the waves of protests, I actually saw another image of this as I was looking and reflecting on this. Those immigration marches of 2006, where you had the Latino radio DJs that were bringing the community out into the streets, must have really resonated in some way with what the Latino community was seeing this past summer in this movement for racial justice. Of course, I think we had a conversation about this before. We were in another panel for the Maynard Institute. You're going to talk to us about where different factors are at play here and where the Latino community expressed itself. But so much of those contexts, I think, are missed. And we are hungry to find out how much of the clamor for racial justice is resonating in the Latino community, because we have many analysts, we have top voices saying what was really striking was how diverse the protesters were. So I wanted to ask you, in fact, the immigration issues that you covered last year were also, or sparked a collaboration with the New York Times, with your editorial team, and then you have these ongoing collaborations with the local media in Atlanta. Talk to us about how all of that and the context of what these dual pandemics have brought to us this summer have enriched your own coverage and conversation at Mundo Hispánico.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation. For us, it's a pleasure to be here sharing, our experience and what we have been doing here in Atlanta. I want to start with Mundo Hispánico. We've been here for 4 years covering Latino issues, and now we're covering Latino issues across the country for every Latino in the state. And as you mentioned, discrimination and the racial injustice is something that is close to us every day, is what our reporting is every day, every day of the week. And recently, when we start talking about the protests and the Black Lives Matter movement and all the racial justice movement that have been out there, we have seen a stronger support from our community to the movement We have seen it a lot in social media more than in the streets, as I mentioned before. At least in Georgia, when our reporters were out there doing the coverage of the protest, we noticed very few Latinos, probably younger Latinos and second generation Latinos on the street. And when we started analyzing what was happening, it's because of the fear, because of the same fear that our community has for being out there in the street. You won't see a Latino undocumented facing the police for any reason. When their cars are stopped, they run away, they get out and they run. So that confrontation won't happen with most of our community. But we saw them very vocal in social media. We saw them supporting a lot. And we saw the younger Latinos and the second generations out there in the streets. That's the community that we see more active in this protest and all this movement. As you mentioned, for us, since we've been here for such a long time, covering, the discrimination is part of our everyday coverage, for Latinos, especially now with the pandemic, we saw the disproportionate impact that it had in our community, especially on the health and on the financial stability. This has been part of our coverage all this month because it's essential that we continue informing and empowering the community, to go through this pandemic. We are one of the media that is being out there, being the voice of the community. And that's exactly that trust that we have built over the years, what opened the door for that collaboration that we were talking about. We were part of Cox Media Group years ago, the last decade. We were with them. And even being part of the same family, sometimes it was, at the beginning, it was kind of hard to get the collaboration rolling between reporters and editor. But as long as they, we started getting to know each other and the reporters are starting to get to see the strength of each one of them, and the collaboration started flowing, and we realized that we could do a lot of better coverage if we work together. We had an example where we had the Atlanta Journal-Constitution or the WSB TV reporters going out to try to talk to the community out there, and people were, shutting doors. They were not speaking. There was communication issues because they didn't speak Spanish. So they always felt better speaking to Mundo. When we were there knocking on the doors, they opened doors very easily. They start talking. They invited us to come in the living room and share the stories with us. And that was the part of the story that they were missing and they needed. And from our side, for them was a lot easier to get a call with the governor, get an open record request done, or get the mayor of a city talking about a particular issue than it was for Mundo Hispánico to get that official voice. So for us, complementing each other was the way to go. It was a very natural collaboration that started happening for some years. 2 years ago, we were sold, so now we're in independent media again. So the collaboration that started there while we were part of the same family continued. So you have reporters calling us, the AJC reporters, the WSB, keep calling our reporters, and we continue seeing, how stronger reporting can be done when we work together. And they are seeing in us a strength when we can get closer to the community, when they open up more, when they share the insights, and when they see our reporters knowing some information about the community that they might not necessarily know because they don't live what we live every day. So I think that's been essential for our collaboration. As you mentioned also, 2 years ago, we worked with the New York Times. They came to Georgia to do a piece on what was happening on the southern states and how migration was being stronger here. The raids were really affecting communities. And in the beginning, they tried to come to Georgia, do the reporting on their own. And everyone, the few people they talked to, they asked them they recommended to talk to Mundo Hispánico. They say, if you want to go reporting here, go and talk to Mundo. They're the ones to guide you. And when we, had the conversation with them, we started going out there in the streets together. They were very, pleased and surprised when they saw that the same doors that they knocked on to try to get interviews. And people were not opening doors. Then when Mario and I knock on doors, they open doors, they share the story, they invited the New York Times reporters to their living room. So it was a complete different feeling when that happened. And they were very, very, very happy to work with us. I think the reporting they ended up doing was great. They were reporting that stories in English. We were doing our pieces in Spanish. And, the combination of effort had a great, great impact.
I think, Maria, you are really articulating here yet another power behind the ethnic media's role in the community. And it's really about those personal relationships. It's really about being part of the community and the innate trust that is there. and what you have done literally and figuratively in opening those doors that allowed a deeper story to emerge, and a deeper perspective that then found its way to that broader platform of the New York Times audience. We're going to be sharing your links, Cheryl's links, and we'll ask Mark and Khanstoshea to share some links with us in our tip sheet of these samples of ethnic media collaborative pieces that have come about. And I'm going to actually ask a question that's coming through the Zoom chat. And I want to tag team with Francisco, and Francisco is going to feel free to unmute himself and talk to us in a little bit. He's giving us some great bandwidth by excusing himself right now on video, but I have a question that has come through, and I want to just invite everyone that's with us. Thank you so much again. We want you to be part of this robust conversation. Please put your questions on the Pathable chat box where you see our session page. There's a particular section there called chat. That's where Francisco, our IRE partner, is grabbing those questions, and that's the route that we're taking, because those are where these questions are going to be archived. And I wanted to ask this question from somebody who's from Texas. And right now, it's a question that is directed to Cheryl very much. But at the same time, if anybody from our panel would also like to share some additional insights, please do so. The question is, and the comment in question is, I'm Texan, and the reputation for many of us who are of color is that the Dallas Morning News has long been the newspaper for white conservatives. Can you talk to us about how this partnership, your partnership with DMN, with Dallas Morning News, shows how much they need your insights? What have you discovered, Cheryl? What has your editorial team discovered? And also expanding on how some Black and white folks aren't as supportive of the partnership as you said. Why is that so?
Oh, very good question. Hello, Texan. And actually, I'm from Jersey. Yes, in fact, I was talking to a student a couple of hours ago, and she hadn't heard about the collaboration, so she was checking it out. She said, don't they realize that people considered them to be the Below plantation? Because that's what they called them, that's what they expected. And I can remember back when there was the Dallas Times Herald, and two reporters went out. There was a story that appeared in the Times Herald and one appeared in the Morning News about the same event, and they were so different in the coverage. And when the Dallas Times Herald referred to the person as passionate, the Morning News referred to this Black man as angry. And it's just little things like that that go a long way into eroding trust. So I'm going to tell you, Grant Moyes, who is the publisher of the Dallas Morning News, and Mike Wilson, I've talked with Mike a lot, and these are people that get it. Everybody is not tone deaf, but they actually get it, and they realize that there are some issues. I'm sitting here and I'm like getting so excited because our world benefits from these collaborations, because some people sit in their towers away from everything. And this is a profession that I love, and I really do not like it when I go out and someone says, your story made me see someone differently. And because they said, because every time I see the person out in public, see them written about by the Dallas Morning News, they're written a certain way. And then they meet them and they're different. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to tell the truth. And so I thought about all of that when I was thinking about, am I going to enter into a partnership with them? Are they open to it? And what I have found is that they are very open to it. And for me, I guess it came at the right time, because the filter has left the room, and I call it like it is. And I just say, this is not right. Come on, let's, if there's something, but then I also applaud what they're doing also. For someone in Texas, when they talk about the Bible Belt, they talk about what we're dealing with. There are people, there was a young lady who said that, you know, after you think about 192 years of the Black press, there was a Black woman who said that John Russwurm, founder of the Freedom's Journal, was probably turning over in his grave at the idea of this collaboration. So I told, shout out to Richard Prince, I said, I'm going to respond to it because I do understand how folks feel. And I also know that John, I would expect it, just like I expect things to grow from today. I'm sure that there are a lot of things that have happened, and there are some things that have happened that I say, okay, the Black press needs help. The Black press needs, there was a time when we were thriving, but just like with all our institutions, the historically Black college, Black church, Black businesses, when we were able to go into other businesses, sometimes we abandoned, a lot of times we abandoned our own. I have people who are Black who now feel like I'm validated because I'm in a partnership with the Dallas Morning News. That is very offensive to me because I've been kicking butt for a long time, winning awards, doing journalistic stuff that when you put me beside a reporter from mainstream, that reporter could be writing about an Easter egg hunt, but they're validated more because they are working for the morning news, the New York Times, and that has been a problem. That has been an issue with us. I think, and I love it because a lot of the Native American journalists that I know, they work for their own publications, and I love that. I love that because I feel like they get the love. Their people realize how important they are. That's been an issue for us with Black people. And yes, I'll say it. They say that constantly the white man's ice is colder. That's what they're saying. So that's why I take this very seriously, because I'm trying to build an organization, and I'm trying to build a better world. And so when things are happening, when I can call attention, if you pick up my publications, and I actually do, I consider us to be pretty diverse. We have at least 3 Latinos, and we have African, and we have, you know, I actually contacted the editor of our daily newsletter, and I said, what are we doing for Hispanic Heritage Month? And you know, I know it made her feel good because she feels like she doesn't have to be LULAC for iMessenger Media. You know, that I'm going to call it out. My people know, and this is one of mine, this is Rebecca Aguilar is trying to reach me right now. She better leave me alone. But I know that we have the conversations. If someone says totem pole in my 4 walls of my establishment, we have a discussion, because I tell them about Patty Talahong, who told me about getting the history of totem poles. So we won't be talking about low man on any pole because that's sacred. And these are the kind of conversations that we have. We don't just talk about Black, because in order for you to understand African, we talk about everybody. We deal with the issues. And I don't want people to think, Texan, that we don't want to take the place. Does this mean that having a collaboration with us and we're addressing issues, and we, you know, I do tell them we are not going to let the morning news out Black us. We're going to come with the stories and issues, but this is not a way for them to say, oh, we don't have to hire. Yeah, you have to hire some more Black people, but guess what? You got to hire some other people who get it too. Everybody should be able to go into the community. Now, while I can walk safely through it, but if you go into any area, and this is where journalism has to do a better job of it, because you have to get out and walk and put your feet to the ground and get in the communities and learn, because that's what was happening when you think about the Kerner Commission report, a number of people we have actually in my partnership with Norma Adams Wade, who is a founder of NABJ, and the partnership, she began writing for me because the Dallas Morning News decided that they were cutting their ethnic columns, and they were cutting her down from 52 weeks to 12. And so I went to her and said, hey, come home. And we started before the collaboration, and she writes, I picked up the other 40 weeks. Was that a challenge for me? Was it an investment? But it was worth it, and it was not because she worked for the morning news. It was because she's an excellent writer. She's from here. She's entrenched in the community, and she's a great storyteller. Because I don't think just because you work there, the morning news, and I wanted them to use my quote because they called and they said, well, how do you feel about this collaboration? I said, you know what? I am so excited because just think about it. Here we have this wonderful opportunity where you have the best paper in the state of Texas is getting to partner with the Dallas Morning News. You know, because we're doing it and we need help. But again, like I say, we have dealt with the problem of our own community not embracing us like we like, or not thinking, you know, if we make a mistake, and we make mistakes, but everybody else does too. And they're making a whole lot more trying to be fast these days. So we're dealing with all of those things as we continue to grow. But we feel like the morning news is benefiting, and guess what? And we're benefiting. Their people are very open to a number of different things that we're talking about collaborating on that will be better for this world and not just for our bottom line.
And I think that's so important about where the alignment of resources that happen with partnerships, and yet again echoing what Maria also articulated about that innate trust in the community. Some years back, I think I was at the Chicago Defender's Office when fake news was just being screamed from the rooftops of the White House, was that when you think about ethnic media, this is a sector where a fake news actually doesn't even exist because there's such that innate trust. Of course, it's not completely a blanket and universal, but there's just the core of, we know that these are people that are covering our stories. I want to bring in Khanstoshea and Mark to react to that particular aspect before I move on to the other questions about, is there a lost voice? Is there that danger, and how do you bridge that or manage that in terms of, do you lose your voice in these collaborations? Khanstoshea, let's start with you.
Yeah, of course. Really great question. I kind of wanted to tie my story a little bit to Cheryl and Maria's as well, because I have experience. We got the press pass under any safety, but then the next conversation I had with the lead editor for the Sacramento Bee was they realized their place within the community, especially the Black community, was that of, it has wronged the Black community. And the stories that they have been putting out since conception haven't necessarily shown great light within the Black community, and they were on the cusp of trying to change that. And so that was one of the other things that they were seeking in our partnership. As well as, just like Maria, there are lots of places, and the protests here in Sacramento, some of the press are not even allowed. We're kind of the only press that are allowed on the ground. And a lot of situations that we go into, we're the only ones allowed into those situations, into homes, because we have spent so much time not only gaining trust, but just really integrating ourselves into the community and really showing that, like, these are matters that are affecting us, and we're really trying to accurately and patiently tell that story. But with that, I think it's more than just hiring an ethnic media base or a Black person or a Mexican or any of these ethnic places. It's more than just hiring. It's more just than building these collaborations. It's then, this is what we bring to the table. What then can you bring to the table? Because we need more than just, we're now the Black token of your company. We need more than, you've now hired a couple of Black people in your, we need more than that. So I think it's us remaining, and I'm going to make us, as much as I don't want to claim that title, the ethnic media, remaining humble, honest, transparent, And I think it's also the people that we're having collaborations with, the mainstream media, realizing why you guys can't come into the community like we can, and instilling and systematically replacing systematic and procedures within your company and how you guys view things and how you guys do things and how you guys treat the community. And that's really going to pull it forward. So it's more than just reaching out and having these collaborations, also diving in deeper of why do you guys even need to have these collaborations in the first place? Because at the end of it, we're not just ethnic media, we're media. We're covering what's going on, you know, and you can put in a bubble and you can say it's minority or ethnic media, but at the end of the day, we're covering a vast majority of things and everything affects everyone differently. So it's, you know, there has to be a workaround systematically and whole, like you were saying, if this is really going to work, because then you do have those, because it is like a burdensome of trust, because how I would run a story is definitely different how, you know, those other partners might run a story. And that breaks down the trust, and that breaks down like, okay, is this still a good collaboration? Is this something, you know, because my goal for me is to tell the story of my community, sometimes me and my people, accurately and effectively, because years and years I've been seeing mainstream media run different narratives that don't make sense and don't coincide with the things that I'm actually seeing on the streets. So for me, that's where I come at it. And I think there needs to be a mutual understanding and just a whole systematic overlay and review of how things have been done and why they're not working and why people like us are trending and why people like us are able to get in the places that we're able to get into.
Mark.
Following up, and I think, again, a couple of Cheryl's points is, I am always amazed at how much readers and audience thank us for what we do. They'll call up out of the blue and just thank you for being there. And it's very different than, I remember when I was in mainstream media, the calls I would get where I'd have to hold the phone at the other end of the room because they were yelling so loud. And folks are just really genuinely touched. We did an election special, and we have two divisions. One, the daily digital broadcast or daily digital report, and then we also have a broadcast on PBS stations. And we did our election special 2 years ago, and it was live for 6 hours. A young woman in northern Minnesota came up to me and just was crying, and she said, "It's the first time in my life that the news has been for me." And we get that all the time, and it really brings us to the point. Our relationship with mainstream media is a little more complicated now because we don't want people to go there anymore. We're done with that. We want to hire them, and we have very competitive salaries. We want the best talent. And two things that come out of that is, one, some of the young people that we've hired say, it's so great to work at a place where I don't have to explain why it's a story. And the other one is we often use indigenous languages in greetings, land acknowledgement, other ways. And again, we put that into our either both the broadcast and the digital report, and we don't explain it. It's just a natural standard. This is how we do business. This is indigenous land, and this is the people who are here, and we acknowledge that. And that's kind of just a really different way of looking at the world.
Thank you, Mark. Again, circling back on that superpower context. Thank you for that question from our texting, and I'm going to move to a question from Nicole Foy, and this is for Maria. So hola Maria, you touched on this a bit, but can you talk a little bit about what the day-to-day collaboration with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution looks like? What works best in these collaborations? What have you learned doesn't work? Great, great question.
Nice, thank you for your question. You know, we left Cox Media Group 2 years ago, and we don't have now going on like a continuous collaboration. It happens more when the news arrives and there is a breaking news and the reporter needs our help, that our reporter and the reporter get in touch and they start working together. So it's not something that you see happening every day, but the doors are open for collaboration whenever we or they need us or we need them. But what I learned trying to open those doors for collaboration is that we tried several times to get this collaboration started from the top bottom. So getting, you know, the approval of the senior editors, getting editors together, the Mundo editors with the AJC editors. We were all like, oh yes, of course, we're gonna collaborate. We're gonna ask the reporters to get in touch with yours, and everything is gonna be beautiful, and they're gonna be best friends, and that's not how things happen. So we tried, you know, several times, several meetings, probably years, trying to get that started at that level, and never happened. It was when the reporters are starting to see each other covering the same sources, when they started to get to be friends and see that they're colleagues, and they started talking, and they started seeing the work of each other, when that collaboration started. And when they start noticing, you know, they were always at the same events, they were always covering the same beat, and they say, well, my best person to work in this story is Mario, the Mundo guy that is always here, that speaks Spanish, that's the one I should be calling. And that's when they started calling, oh, hey guy, oh, but this guy's strong in the community. He has so many contacts. The people loves him. Everyone opens the door. So the reporters say, well, this is my partner. I need them for my reporting. And that's how things started to happen. You know, when they start seeing the value in each of us. And my advice is that, you know, I think that you build a growing post from the top bottom. It just happens if you start building this relationship at the reporters level, because it's when they see the strength of each other. I think you're muted, Odette.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you so much, Maria, for the response to that. And you know, there are great questions coming through, but I wanted to jump off of this question and really talk to the panel, and everything that Khanstoshea spoke to us about, everything that Mark spoke to us about where partnerships and collaborations are equitable. And so much of my own background, having come and having been at the helm of the Filipino Channel's North America News Bureau, it just harkens back to all of those experiences of what is now so fundamental, and that is a respect of each other's expertise. There have been some collaborations, and I've been in a panel about the pain points of collaboration. You know, you have the collaborations with the so-and-so, the big boys, right? The New York Times, the Washington Post, and I'm not trying to single anything out or lay fingers, but it's about when you come to the table, no matter what tier, no matter what level you are, as Khanstoshea said, and this is something that I've said to my crew, you're a journalist, period. Back in, I think just after 9/11 and in the years following, speaking to my reporter and sent her to Cape Canaveral, to Florida. And yes, you're gonna cover that space shuttle launch and that space shuttle tragedy. And yes, maybe all of the other cameras around you are going to be you know, the big cameras. We have our own. We were actually at the forefront with our little GLX, because now all multimedia journalists use that. And just one anecdote I'm also going to mention. I sent my reporter to the Super Bowl press conference. At that time, Teddy Bruschi, who's half Filipino, was with the Patriots. And she said, I was the desk assignment editor, I was the news executive producer, and my reporter asked me, you know, with a little trepidation, Odette, are you sure? You know, I'm right here in the field, and the ESPN, the CNN cameras, I mean, they're bigger than me. And I'm this little woman with my little GLX. And what happened, what transpired is that she asked a question about Teddy's heritage and about what was his favorite dish that his grandma cooked, that lumpia. And he answered that question and directed his attention right to her. And after that, every single sports reporter that we continue to see on TV just turned to Len and said, what was that? What was that about? And it became this moment where she opened up a door about culture and heritage that would not have had happened had she not been in that arena. And I wanted to maybe kind of ask our speakers, when you enter into these partnerships, do you feel that there is that respect of each other's background, of what you bring? Like, little do they know that you're speaking with a Korean reporter who's an award-winning journalist in their field. And if people don't take the time to find out who am I entering into a relationship with, that respect doesn't come through. And I wonder what boundaries you set for yourself. How do you make sure that when you start these partnerships, they're going to be equitable for you? And I'll let anybody start with that. Mark, Khanstoshea, perhaps, Cheryl?
I'll jump in. We recently had a partnership that did not go well. And basically the newspaper and the nonprofit investigative unit that everyone knows came to us with the story way late, and it didn't work for us. And finally we went back and forth, and at one point they were mad because I sent an email that said it didn't meet our standards, and we didn't publish it. And we did say that if you come back and write something in context, we would be open to it. But I think sometimes you just got to tell them, no, it's not working. I think any collaboration has to be all the way and involving a lot of communications, and it can't just be thrown at somebody at the last minute as if you're expected to follow along, because we're leading, we're not going to follow along.
And that at the very beginning, expectations are set of each other, that there are clear agreements. Khanstoshea, is there something that you may want to add to that aspect of your own experience?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of different collaborations, not only with the Sacramento Bee, but the just local and national news organizations, more so when the story is breaking and our people are just always on the ground somewhere getting into things, and you know, great footage and getting it off to there. But I think what Mark was saying is just at the forefront in the beginning, having those clear expectations. And then for me as a Black woman, just making sure I'm not entering into collaborations where I'm being that token Black woman, or, you know, there's a little bit more things that we can offer each other, and that respectability. Because if you are hiring me to be that token Black woman, then that respect of the legacy of the things that I've been doing for life is not there. So I think it's like, it's a give and a flow of just really systematically taking a look at how things are done and how processes and programs are viewed, and how they affect the people you're working with and the communities that you're speaking to and speaking, you know, about. I think all of those things, hammering that out at the beginning and really understanding who you are and who that collaborator is, I think all those are, you know, just really important.
What wonderful. You know, Khanstoshea, I'm going to pivot to a next question here that's really to all of you, but everything that you have just reinforced right now and the thread that you were so passionate about earlier resonates with so much of the Maynard Institute's work and with the Fault Lines Diversity Framework, and how much of that needed to evolve with this moment, with how we want to be dismantlers of systemic racism. Because yes, there is always that danger of that tokenism that happens with every DEI initiative. In fact, we have flipped it on its head and we call it EID, equity and inclusion in the service of diversity. So that, because tokenism just becomes that outcome that is unwarranted and unnecessary, and it does not embody what was the goal in the very beginning. And what we are looking at right now in our own EID initiative is to really look at creating institutions of belonging, because are we really listening to those voices? Or did we just hire them, exactly what you said, because of their heritage, but not respecting what they bring, not respecting the body of work that they hold? And so I'm going to pivot to this question. There's a little bit, and Cheryl, I think your response here might be a little bit related to what Sally is asking. And I am so careful with names, Sally. I hope I'm saying this correctly. My French is atrocious. I think it's Sally Beauvoir. And she's asking something I'm curious to hear more about. It's so clear that all of you bring invaluable work, contexts, connections to the organizations you partner with. I'd love to hear more about the specifics of what the partnerships look like. So a little bit of what we have just been starting with and discussing a while ago, and why they're worth it to you. Do you collaborate on stories with equal editorial control? Do you keep it to sharing sources and resources? Do you feel you have equal agency over the terms of the partnership? great reinforcement of everything that we're talking about. Maybe Cheryl and then Maria, tell us your thoughts on that.
Yes, real quickly, I'll tell you, at first I didn't grasp it really, but one time I was running to a meeting with some execs from the morning news, and I said, you know, I just made it on time. I was just coming from something Spud Webb was doing. He's a former NBA star, and he was doing something with children, signing autographs for children getting free meals. And they said, oh, you should have called us. We would have sent a photographer out there for you. So they have kind of like made me one of them in a sense that they're like, we're all a part of a team in covering this community. And so if I need a heavier hand, and it was mentioned earlier, like sometimes there are some stories that I say, oh, this is a really big one that let's collaborate on that story. But what does a collaboration look like for us? Just some basic, like 4 things. We share, they can share any of our stories from Texas Metro News and Garland Journal and iMessenger. And I get to pick stories that I want to run from them. And we also will be sponsoring events together, like I talked about the town hall meetings. We participate in training. If there's training that the Dallas Morning News has, and if I or my team wants to participate in that training, we do so, and vice versa. We have weekly editorial meetings where we talk about stories and what's going on. We were having a conversation earlier this week because this big story ran about a pastor who some might call a sexual predator, and the stuff that he did. And so we had a conversation about what the motivation was for the story and what it was going to look like out there in the community. Because I think more than anything, just like with me, we want balance. If you're going to write about, if you're going to deep dive into the dirt and filth, deep dive into those positive, uplifting stories as well. So that's what it looks like in a sense. There is a monetary, but the one thing that is most important is there's no way, and I wouldn't let it happen, is it little me and big Ben. We are equal, and we discuss the issues, and the difference in myself and someone working for them who may not feel the freedom. And I know that many of you have heard about the stories across the country where we are not, where newsrooms are having issues because people are saying things and not, and people don't feel empowered enough to speak up. Well, I feel empowered to speak up, and just like as a member of the Black press, I speak for those who can't speak for themselves. I'm speaking for everybody.
That's so important. Maria.
I think for us, we have different type of collaborations. Some of them is when reporters get together to write a story together. So they define since the beginning, what is the deadline, who's gonna publish first, or what day and time we're publishing. You can get the story on Mundo and on the AJC at the same time. There are another type of collaboration where they just gather information, they share the information, and each reporter just translate the information and do their own stories about the issue we're covering. And we also had some collaboration where we were publishing some of the AJC stories in Spanish, and they were using some of the Mundo's stories, translating them into English. So these are the 3 types of collaboration that we have worked on during the years.
And we're going to get to Gustavo's question here. Thank you so much, Cheryl and Maria, for answering Sally. But I want to make sure I ask this. This is so fundamental. And I also want to preface it that what we truly hope for here is at the end of it all, we enter into these partnerships as journalists, as media professionals. And yes, we bring the background and the perspective, but we hope for that time to come where we're not, why do we have to work double to prove ourselves or to eliminate doubts? We need to come into these partners as equal players. And with that, I wanted to ask each one of you very briefly, we're coming up on time, and I want to be able to ask one last question from Gustavo, and we'll make sure we're able to connect you with those who are asking questions. In your partnerships, do you have financial agreements and funding agreements, and how did you arrive at making sure they were equitable and really balanced and fair to the work that you're pouring into it, into the value of what you're bringing, your relationships with the community, the kinds of deep perspectives that you have. I wanted to see, because this is what many are looking at in the field, can more collaborations, whether they're ethnic and mainstream, whether they're each sector with each other, can they help the sustainability of the entire field of journalism as a whole and help its own stability? Mark, how do you answer that?
I was laughing because I think right now our financial situation is better than the media's. So, I mean, we're growing. We're in a position of growing. Our #1 demographic is 25 to 34. And that's not something you hear in mainstream media. I think our being a nonprofit really gives us an advantage that the mainstream media doesn't have. So I'm not sure they're the ones willing to help, but we should have financial relations with them. That's the short answer.
Anybody else who might want to answer that? And Maria, I have a question for you, so maybe you can weave that into that answer. Cheryl.
Yes, and people have asked, you know, there is a financial, they are paying for my stories, paying for content. And, but there are also other things we're talking about. We're talking about them printing my publication for me. And we're also talking about distribution, because you have to keep in mind, pre-COVID, we were going in over 300 Black churches. Dallas Morning News can't come in those 300 churches, but if we insert them in Texas Metro News, they can get in that way, and we can build that way. So we're looking at all kinds of ways to make it beneficial for both of us. And I've heard from so many people, and they say it time and time again, they need you. This is good for them. This is very good for them. And they understand that because not only are they getting stories and ideas and everything, they're getting someone who knows this business, knows the industry, knows the communities. And I share that information with them and hope that they will grow and do better. And I'm not worried about them taking over me or me suffering, because we're growing together. And I'm looking at those little things, because even when you think about something as simple as distribution, that's not simple. When you think about the things that you tacking on and sponsoring something in our community that they may have overlooked, but because I'm bringing it to them, they give it a second look. So our community is benefiting from this collaboration.
Thank you. Khanstoshea, I wonder if there was something you wanted to briefly add.
Yeah, so at first our partnerships did not have any monetary thing. I didn't even know that was a thing, because I wasn't coming at it at a journalistic plate. We were just really trying to tell the stories within our community, and we're just so interconnected. And so at first I guess we're doing it for exposure, and eventually with the Sacramento V, we entered into a contract for the documentary that we're producing for them. And then we also have a third-party distribution team that manages the content that we have and gets it to local and national news organizations depending on the need. And those have separate contracts as well. So the way we do things is a little bit different. We come at it, like you were saying, more of like a multimedia content creation documentary, documenting what's going on. But we also have people not only live streaming, we have people out there with actual camera equipment. So we are able to do a hybrid of both of what's needed. So yeah, at first it was just all out of the name of love and passion, and it still is that. And we're just finding ways to sustain that through those partnerships. But unfortunately, not all of the partnerships have that monetary value. And for those, it does find it harder to sustain, because this is actual work. We are hiring people, so I'm not having to do everything. So there has to be the understanding of the give and flow of like what it takes and the respectability of our work, and it takes a lot to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really very clear, and I've had a conversation with you, Maria, about the double byline and the respect of what the editorial person, what your staff member brings to that piece, to that product, to that partnership. I'm going to weave into a last question. Thank you again for everybody who put their questions in the pathable route here. And it's a question to Maria from Gustavo Martinez Contreras. Maria, un saludo. How has Mundo's trust or reputation among the Atlanta metro Latinx immigrant community been affected after one of your reporters, known for having very close relationships with law enforcement, basically made a police officer arrest an undocumented driver with no driver's license during the checkpoints he routinely covers and broadcasts? Have you stopped that reporter from running mugshots of people accused of crimes in the pages of Mundo Hispánico?
Thank you for the question, Gustavo. That was a big, a big situation we had to face last year when we published a video of one of our reporters that unfortunately his English is not good. So he was trying to ask some questions to the police officer, and he asked twice if that person had the proper documentation. To his point, to Mario's story, he was, that's questions that he always asks, because that's always part of our story, where the person is from, if that person is allowed to be in the country, or if they're driving with a driver license here. In this case, the guy was arrested, not for not having a license, but his license was suspended. So everything was taken out of context. There was a lot of social media comments, and somebody even got a piece of that video and took it out of context and started sharing the video across all social media channels. We had to, go and talk to the community. We had Mario on Facebook Live explaining in detail what was happening. He was saying, how bad he felt that this was taken out of context, that he was really doing his job. And I think, after few days or few weeks, the community is starting, calming down. They're starting, to come back to Mundo, to trust everything we were doing. And there's always some people angry at the work we do, but most of the community stays with us as always. They understood this was like a mistake that Mario did, asking maybe the question twice. That's what made people angry. But we were very clear explaining that it happened not because Mario's question, the guy had the license suspended, and that's why he was arrested. So he wasn't even undocumented, as everyone tried to make it look like that he was against the community and trying to be, getting our community arrested. And I think that's something that always happens, especially with us as a community media. When the community feels that we're always the activists that are defending the community, and when we report something that makes somebody look bad, or that is really telling a bad story about the community, like people start getting angry, like, why aren't you protecting us? Why are you putting a lie into this story? And that's, that's our work. That's what we have to do, just tell the stories, tell what's happening. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, no, that it's an important clarification, it's important clarity when we traverse that role. This almost behooves a whole, hour conversation itself of what it means to be journalists that hold true to those principles of accuracy and integrity and fairness and balance, and for this sector to be accused of being advocates and not journalists. I think that alone is yet another, but I think you were able to clarify that so importantly, because you cover the community as you would cover any community, any issue. There is a deep relationship, and yet there is a fairness about what is truly happening and what is facts and what is it to be a journalist and to seek the truth. We have come up to the end. And just enough time for me to make sure to thank all of you. Thank you, Maria, Bastidas from Mundo Hispánico, Cheryl Smith from iMessenger Media LLC, Khanstoshea Zingapan from Black Zebra Productions, and Mark Trahant from India Country Today. Thank you for this conversation, for your voices. Thank you for the work that you continue to do for our communities. I think what we have seen here, and I am thanking all of you on behalf of our partners at IRE, with Francisco and Denise, is that we now have come at two superpowers here of the ethnic media, and that is context, and that is also trust, because that is so pivotal right now as we recover from the wreckage of this global pandemic, as we look ahead to November in these elections that is a battle for the soul of our democracy and the soul of our nation, and a battle for the very soul of journalism itself, as we say, and really how pivotal, both those powers are in holding true to what we are, and that is as journalists and chroniclers of the story of the America that we are still becoming. And I wanted to also just thank our IRE partners and also mention that our speakers' contact information is on the Pathable session page. To everyone who attended, a big thank you from all of us, and we would love this opportunity to continue to connect you to our speakers. Perhaps you may have some follow-up questions for them. We'll also connect with you through Maynard Institute. Our resources and our links are also on that Pathable session page on files or resources. You'll see our links to our newsletter, our social media portals, and our platforms. And we will have more conversations with ethnic media leaders. We will have more conversations with our mainstream media partners and media professionals as a whole. We will have digital conversations about voter suppression, about this upcoming election, and about all of the various aspects that are impacting all of our communities of all backgrounds. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you again to all our speakers and from all of our team. Thank you.